I want you to understand something clearly. This was not just a funeral. When thousands gathered for the burial of Saif al-Islam Gaddafi, the world saw crowds. I saw a message. In Libya, more than a decade after foreign intervention, people did not come together out of nostalgia alone. They came because something inside the nation remains unresolved. When a society has moved on, funerals are quiet. When it has not, they become mirrors. Many in the West will say, "This is Libya's past." But nations do not bury their past this loudly unless the present has failed them. You removed a leader, you dismantled a state, but you never replaced legitimacy, and legitimacy cannot be imported. What you witnessed in Libya was not a political rally, and it was not a call to war. It was something more dangerous to external power: memory, memory of order, memory of sovereignty, memory of being heard. I have warned before. When outside forces decide the future of African nations without the people, instability does not end. It migrates, it matures, and it returns stronger. Libya is not exploding. Libya is awakening, and awakenings do not ask permission. Let me speak directly to those watching from the United States and Europe. You are told that moments like this are regressions, that crowds at a funeral mean instability, that Africa is moving backward. That interpretation is convenient and wrong. What you saw in Libya was not chaos. It was a response to a vacuum. When institutions collapse and promises dissolve, people return to symbols that once gave structure to their lives. This is not ideology, it is human nature. After intervention, Libya was offered elections without unity, governance without authority, and security without sovereignty. You cannot build a nation on procedures alone. A state survives on legitimacy, and legitimacy must be recognized by the people themselves. Here is where the misunderstanding begins. In Western capitals, legitimacy is measured by paperwork. In Africa, it is measured by whether the state protects, feeds, and respects its citizens. When those functions disappear, memory fills the gap. This is why I have warned repeatedly. Removing a leader without rebuilding a sovereign system does not free a nation, it fragments it. And fragments do not stay still. They shift, they realign, they speak, sometimes through silence, sometimes through crowds. Libya is not asking to return to the past. It is asking why the future it was promised never arrived, and that question is now impossible to ignore. I need you to understand this clearly. Libya is not an isolated case. It is a pattern. Across Africa, I have watched the same sequence repeat itself. A leader is removed in the name of democracy. The state is weakened in the name of reform. Foreign advisors arrive with blueprints. And when the dust settles, the people are left with less security than before. What happened in Libya happened because power was broken faster than it was rebuilt. The funeral of Saif al-Islam Gaddafi was not about one man. It was about a collective realization that external solutions do not automatically produce internal stability. I have seen this lesson echoed from the Sahel to the Horn of Africa. When sovereignty is compromised, states become experiments, and experiments have subjects. The West often asks why African nations struggle to stabilize. It rarely asks who designed the instability. This is not an attack on any country. It is an observation. Nations that cannot control their own security cannot control their future, and nations that cannot control their future will eventually challenge the forces that shape their past. Libya is speaking in a language of symbolism. Africa is listening, and the message is spreading faster than many expected. Those who rely on power often misunderstand memory. They believe that when statues fall and governments collapse, history disappears with them. But history does not vanish. It retreats. It waits. And when conditions allow, it returns, not as nostalgia, but as comparison. This is what we witnessed in Libya. No army mobilized those crowds. No political party organized that moment. Memory did. People remember whether their streets were safe. They remember whether the state functioned. They remember whether dignity existed alongside authority. These memories do not need speeches. They live quietly until reality forces a comparison. That is why the funeral of Saif al-Islam Gaddafi carried such weight. It was not a call to restore a system. It was a reminder that something once held the country together and that something is missing today. Military force can remove leaders, sanctions can pressure governments, but neither can erase lived experience. This is the mistake external powers continue to make. They treat Africa as a chessboard of moves and countermoves, ignoring that people are not pieces. They are witnesses, and witnesses remember. When memory clashes with imposed reality, force loses its advantage. Not immediately, but inevitably, because you can occupy territory, but you cannot occupy the past. Libya's silence after the funeral is not calm. It is reflection, and reflection is where real change begins. There is a belief, especially in Western policy circles, that elections automatically create legitimacy. They do not. Elections are tools. Legitimacy is a relationship. In Libya, ballots were introduced before trust was restored, before security was unified, before the nation itself was whole. What followed was not democracy, but competition without cohesion, institutions without authority. This is where many outside observers become confused. They ask, why do people not believe in the new system? The answer is simple. A system must prove itself before it can be trusted. When a state cannot protect its citizens, control its territory, or deliver basic stability, legitimacy erodes, regardless of how leaders are selected. This is not an African problem. It is a universal one. The funeral of Saif al-Islam Gaddafi revealed this truth without slogans or speeches. People did not gather to reject democracy. They gathered to express disconnection from a political order that never earned their confidence. I have warned that exporting political models without respecting context creates hollow states. They look functional on paper, but collapse under pressure. Legitimacy grows from the ground up. It is built through security, dignity, and continuity. Without those foundations, elections become ceremonies, not solutions. And Libya is showing the world what happens when ceremonies replace substance. What happens in Libya does not stay in Libya. Borders on maps do not stop consequences. When Libya's state collapsed, weapons flowed south. Fighters moved freely, smuggling routes expanded, instability found new roads. This is not speculation, it is geography meeting reality. The Sahel did not create this storm, it inherited it. I speak from experience. In West Africa, we live with the downstream effects of decisions made far away, often without our consent. When order breaks in one country, pressure builds in the next. Communities absorb it first, states feel it later, the world notices it last. This is why I say Libya's funeral moment matters to all of Africa. It reminds us that when sovereignty is fractured anywhere, insecurity multiplies everywhere. You cannot surgically remove a government and expect the region to remain stable. Power vacuums do not respect borders. They expand until confronted by legitimacy or force, and force alone never lasts. For audiences in the United States and Europe, understand this. The Sahel's instability is not a mystery. It is a consequence chain, and Libya sits at a critical link in that chain. Africa is not a collection of isolated crises. It is an interconnected system. Ignore one fracture, and the stress spreads. Libya is not just remembering its past. The Sahel is living with its aftermath. For many years, Africa was told that stability meant alignment, align with foreign security strategies, align with external economic models, align with decisions made elsewhere. But alignment is not the same as peace. In Libya, stability was defined from the outside after intervention, measured by conferences, roadmaps, and recognition by foreign governments. Yet on the ground, daily life became less predictable, not more. This is the contradiction Africans are no longer willing to ignore. Real stability is not declared in meeting rooms, it is felt in homes. It is measured by whether parents trust tomorrow more than yesterday. When that trust disappears, official narratives lose credibility. The funeral of Saif al-Islam Gaddafi exposed this gap. International observers saw a sensitive moment. Libyans experienced a collective reckoning. Across Africa, people are asking a difficult question. If externally defined stability produces endless transition, who benefits from it? I have said this before and I will repeat it. Africa does not reject cooperation. We reject dependency disguised as partnership. Stability cannot be outsourced. Security cannot be subcontracted. Legitimacy cannot be certified abroad. Libya's moment is not about the past returning. It is about Africans redefining what order truly means. And that redefinition has already begun. There is a reason moments like this create discomfort in Western capitals. They challenge a long-held assumption that Africa's political direction can be managed from the outside. When Africans begin to question externally designed outcomes, the narrative becomes harder to control. In Libya, the reaction to Saif al-Islam Gaddafi's funeral was not violent, it was symbolic, and symbols are powerful because they cannot be sanctioned or bombed away. What unsettles the West is not instability. It has learned how to operate within instability. What unsettles it is autonomy. Autonomous thinking disrupts predictable alliances and managed outcomes. For decades, African states were expected to accept frameworks built elsewhere, even when those frameworks failed locally. Now, people are comparing promises with results and drawing their own conclusions. This is not hostility, it is evaluation. When I speak about sovereignty, it is not a call for isolation, it is a call for balance. Partnership without respect is control by another name. Libya's moment reminds the world that African societies are not blank slates. They remember what worked, what failed, and who benefited. And when memory meets awareness, silence becomes choice. The West feels uneasy because choice has returned. Let me be clear, especially for audiences in the United States and Europe. What you are seeing is not hatred of the West. It is the end of illusion. For a long time, Africa was told that progress would arrive automatically if we followed certain prescriptions: political, economic, military. When those prescriptions failed, we were told to wait longer, try again, or accept instability as a transition phase. But people do not live in phases. They live in reality. In Libya, the response to the funeral of Saif al-Islam Gaddafi was not a rejection of the outside world. It was a rejection of narratives that promised one outcome and delivered another. This distinction matters. Africa is not turning inward. It is turning honest. Honest about what worked, what didn't, and who paid the price. Honest conversations make some partners uncomfortable, not because they are wrong, but because they expose imbalance. I have said before, cooperation must be mutual, or it is not cooperation. Respect cannot be selective. Sovereignty cannot be conditional. The illusion was that stability could be engineered without consent. The reality is that legitimacy grows only where people recognize themselves in power. Libya's moment is not rebellion, it is clarity, and clarity, once reached, does not reverse. So the real question now is not about Libya alone. It is about what follows moments like this, when people begin to reassess legitimacy, when they compare lived experience with promised futures. A quiet shift takes place. It does not announce itself with slogans. It shows up in expectations, in patience running thin, in demands becoming clearer. For partners in the United States and Europe, this is a turning point. Engagement with Africa can no longer rely on templates designed elsewhere. Security arrangements must produce safety. Economic partnerships must produce development. Political advice must produce trust. If outcomes fail, explanations will no longer be accepted in place of results. This is not confrontation, it is recalibration. Africa's future will not be shaped by nostalgia, and it will not be shaped by dependency. It will be shaped by systems that work, systems people recognize as their own. Libya's moment reminds us that unfinished transitions do not disappear. They accumulate pressure until societies demand resolution. I have warned that ignoring these signals leads to surprise, and surprise leads to reaction rather than partnership. There is still space for cooperation, but cooperation now requires listening, not directing. The era of assumed consent is ending. What replaces it will depend on whether the world chooses respect over management. This moment is not being shaped by nostalgia alone. It is being shaped by youth. Across Africa, a new generation is asking harder questions than the last. They are connected, informed, and less willing to accept explanations that do not match their lived reality. They did not experience past systems directly, but they are living with the consequences of their collapse. In Libya, many of those present at Saif al-Islam Gaddafi's funeral were young. This matters. It tells us that the conversation is not about restoring old leaders, but about searching for stability that delivers dignity. Young Africans are not rejecting democracy. They are rejecting dysfunction. They see promises repeated while conditions stagnate. They see resources extracted while opportunity remains limited, and they see narratives that blame internal failure without acknowledging external influence. This generation does not want instruction, it wants agency. For Western audiences, understand this clearly. Africa's youth are not anti-global. They are anti-ineffective systems. They are open to partnership, but only partnerships that produce visible outcomes. This is why symbolic moments resonate so deeply. They signal that the future is not being passively inherited. It is being actively questioned, and questioning is the first step toward redesign. I want to offer a warning, but also an opening. Moments like the funeral in Libya are crossroads. They can lead toward deeper fragmentation, or they can lead toward honest reconstruction. The direction depends on whether those with power choose to listen or to dismiss. Ignoring these signals is the greatest mistake. When people gather quietly, without weapons, without commands, it means pressure is building beneath the surface. Dismissing that pressure does not dissolve it, it concentrates it. History shows this clearly, not only in Africa, but everywhere. The death of Saif al-Islam Gaddafi closed one chapter. The reaction to his funeral opened another, a chapter defined by questions that can no longer be postponed. For Western partners, the opportunity still exists. Engagement can evolve from control to cooperation, from templates to tailored solutions, from urgency to patience. But this requires humility. and humility is harder than intervention. Africa is not demanding perfection. It is demanding sincerity, sincere security, sincere development, sincere respect for sovereignty. If these signals are understood now, instability can be prevented rather than managed later. If they are ignored, surprise will return, and surprise is always more expensive. The choice is still open, but it will not remain open forever. Let me close with this. The funeral in Libya was not about reviving the past. It was about confronting the present. It reminded the world that nations do not reset with regime change. They carry memory, expectation, and unresolved questions forward. The death of Saif al-Islam Gaddafi did not end a debate. It intensified it. And that debate is not confined to Libya. It echoes across Africa, and it is being watched far beyond it. My message to the West is not a threat. It is an invitation to understand. Africa is not rejecting partnership. It is rejecting imbalance. It is not closing doors. It is asking who holds the keys. If cooperation is built on respect, it will endure. If it is built on management, it will collapse. Libya's moment is a signal, not of chaos, but of consciousness, a reminder that sovereignty cannot be postponed forever, and legitimacy cannot be outsourced indefinitely. The world can choose to see this as instability, or it can see it as what it truly is. A continent speaking in its own voice again, and once a voice is found, it is never easily silenced.
Subscribe to Voice of Sovereign Africa today. Let's build a greater Africa together.